Jack the Ripper was a serial killer active in the largely impoverished areas in and around the Whitechapel district of London, in 1888. In both the criminal case files and contemporary journalistic accounts, the killer was called the Whitechapel Murderer and Leather Apron. Attacks ascribed to Jack the Ripper typically involved female prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of the East End of London. The body of the Ripper's first victim, Mary Ann Nichols, was discovered at about 3:40 a.m. on Friday, the 31st of August 1888, in Bucks Row, Whitechapel. Nichols had last been seen alive approximately 1 hour before the discovery of her body by a Mrs. Emily Holland, with whom she had previously shared a bed at a common lodging house in Thrall Street, Spitalfields, walking in the direction of Whitechapel Road. Her throat was severed by 2 deep cuts, one of which completely severed all the tissue down to the vertebrae. Her vagina had been stabbed twice, and the lower part of her abdomen was partly ripped open by a deep jagged wound, causing her bowels to protrude. Several other incisions inflicted to both sides of her abdomen had also been caused by the same knife. Each of these wounds had been inflicted in a downward thrusting manner. 1 week later, on Saturday the 8th of September 1888, the body of Annie Chapman was discovered at approximately 6 a.m., near the steps to the doorway of the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, Spitalfields. As in the case of Mary Ann Nichols, the throat was severed by 2 deep cuts. Her abdomen had been cut entirely open, with a section of the flesh from her stomach being placed upon her left shoulder, and another section of skin and flesh plus her small intestines, being removed and placed above her right shoulder. Chapman's autopsy also revealed that her uterus and sections of her bladder and vagina had been removed. At the inquest into Chapman's murder, Elizabeth Long described having seen Chapman standing outside 29 Hanbury Street at about 5:30 a.m., in the company of a dark-haired man, wearing a brown deerstalker hat and dark overcoat, and of a shabby genteel appearance. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were both killed in the early morning hours of Sunday the 30th of September 1888. Stride's body was discovered at approximately 1 a.m., in Dutfield's Yard, off Berner Street in Whitechapel. The cause of death was a single clear-cut incision, measuring 6 inches across her neck, which had severed her left carotid artery and her trachea, before terminating beneath her right jaw. The absence of any further mutilations to her body has led to uncertainty as to whether Stride's murder was committed by the Ripper, or whether he was interrupted during the attack. Several witnesses later informed police they had seen Stride in the company of a man in or close to Berner Street, on the evening of the 29th of September and in the early hours of the 30th of September, but each gave differing descriptions. Some said that her companion was fair, others dark, some said that he was shabbily dressed, others well dressed. Eddowes's body was found in Mitre Square in the City of London, 3/4 of an hour after the discovery of the body of Elizabeth Stride. Her throat was severed, and her abdomen ripped open by a long, deep and jagged wound, before her intestines had been placed over her right shoulder. The left kidney and the major part of the uterus had been removed, and her face had been disfigured, with her nose severed, her cheek slashed, and cuts measuring 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch respectively, vertically incised through each of her eyelids. A triangular incision, the apex of which pointed towards Eddowes's eye, had also been carved upon each of her cheeks, and a section of the auricle and lobe of her right ear was later recovered from her clothing. The police surgeon who conducted the post-mortem upon Eddowes's body, stated his opinion these mutilations would have taken, at least 5 minutes, to complete. A local cigarette salesman named Joseph Laurent had passed through the square with 2 friends shortly before the murder, and he described seeing a fair-haired man of shabby appearance with a woman who may have been Eddowes. Laurent's companions were unable to confirm his description. The murders of Stride and Eddowes ultimately became known as the double event. A section of Eddowes's bloodied apron was found at the entrance to a tenement in Goulston Street, Whitechapel, at 2:55 a.m. A chalk inscription upon the wall directly above this piece of apron read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." This graffito became known as the Goulston Street graffito. The message appeared to imply that a Jew or Jews in general were responsible for the series of murders, but it is unclear whether the graffito was written by the murderer on dropping the section of apron, or was merely incidental and nothing to do with the case. Such graffiti were commonplace in Whitechapel. Police Commissioner Charles Warren feared that the graffito might spark anti-Semitic riots, and ordered the writing washed away before dawn. The extensively mutilated and disemboweled body of Mary Jane Kelly was discovered lying on the bed in the single room where she lived, at 13 Millers Court off Dorset Street, Spitalfields, at 10:45 a.m., on Friday, the 9th of November 1888. Her face had been hacked beyond all recognition, with her throat severed down to the spine, and the abdomen almost emptied of its organs. Her uterus, kidneys and one breast, had been placed beneath her head, and other viscera from her body placed beside her foot about the bed, and sections of her abdomen and thighs upon a bedside table. The heart was missing from the crime scene. Multiple ashes found within the fireplace at 13 Millers Court suggested Kelly's murderer had burned several combustible items to illuminate the single room as he mutilated her body. A recent fire had been severe enough to melt the solder between a kettle and its spout, which had fallen into the grate of the fireplace. Over the course of the Whitechapel murders, the police, newspapers, and other individuals received hundreds of letters regarding the case. Some letters were well-intentioned offers of advice as to how to catch the killer, but the vast majority were either hoaxes or generally useless. Hundreds of letters claimed to have been written by the killer himself, and three of these in particular are prominent: the Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, and the From Hell letter. The Dear Boss letter, dated the 25th of September and postmarked the 27th of September 1888, was received that day by the Central News Agency, and was forwarded to Scotland Yard on the 29th of September. Initially, it was considered a hoax, but when Eddowes was found 3 days after the letter's postmark with a section of one ear obliquely cut from her body, the promise of the author to clip the lady's ears off gained attention. Eddowes' ear appears to have been nicked by the killer incidentally during his attack, and the letter writer's threat to send the ears to the police was never carried out. The name, Jack the Ripper, was first used in this letter by the signatory and gained worldwide notoriety after its publication. Most of the letters that followed copied this letter's tone. Some sources claim that another letter dated the 17th of September 1888 was the first to use the name Jack the Ripper, but most experts believe that this was a fake inserted into police records in the 20th century. The Saucy Jackie postcard was postmarked the 1st of October 1888, and was received the same day by the Central News Agency. The handwriting was similar to the Dear Boss letter, and mentioned the canonical murders committed on the 30th of September, which the author refers to by writing, double event this time. It has been argued that the postcard was posted before the murders were publicized, making it unlikely that a crank would hold such knowledge of the crime. However, it was postmarked more than 24 hours after the killings occurred, long after details of the murders were known and publicized by journalists, and had become general community gossip by the residents of Whitechapel. The From Hell letter was received by George Lusk, leader of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, on the 16th of October 1888. The handwriting and style is unlike that of the Dear Boss letter and Saucy Jackie postcard. The letter came with a small box in which Lusk discovered half of a human kidney, preserved in spirits of wine ethanol. Eddowes' left kidney had been removed by the killer. The writer claimed that he fried and ate the missing kidney half. There is disagreement over the kidney. Some contend that it belonged to Eddowes, while others argue that it was a macabre practical joke. The kidney was examined by Dr. Thomas Openshaw of the London Hospital, who determined that it was human and from the left side, but contrary to false newspaper reports, he could not determine any other biological characteristics. Openshaw subsequently also received a letter signed Jack the Ripper. Scotland Yard published facsimiles of the Dear Boss letter, and the postcard on the 3rd of October, in the ultimately vain hope that a member of the public would recognize the handwriting. Charles Warren explained in a letter to Godfrey Lushington, Permanent Under-Secretary of State for the Home Department, "I think the whole thing a hoax, but of course we are bound to try and ascertain the writer in any case." On the 7th of October 1888, George R. Sims in the Sunday newspaper Referee, implied scathingly that the letter was written by a journalist to hurl the circulation of a newspaper sky high. Police officials later claimed to have identified a specific journalist as the author of both the Dear Boss letter and the postcard. The journalist was identified as Tom Bullen in a letter from Chief Inspector John Littlechild to George R. Sims, dated the 23rd of September 1913. A journalist named Fred Best reportedly confessed in 1931 that he and a colleague at the Star had written the letters signed Jack the Ripper, to heighten interest in the murders and keep the business alive. Each of the canonical 5 murders was perpetrated at night on or close to a weekend, either at the end of a month or a week or so after. Historically, the belief these 5 canonical murders were committed by the same perpetrator is derived from contemporary documents which link them together to the exclusion of others. Mary Jane Kelly is generally considered to be the Ripper's final victim, and it is assumed that the crimes ended because of the culprit's death, imprisonment, institutionalization or immigration. Butchers, slaughterers, surgeons, and physicians were suspected because of the manner of the mutilations. A surviving note from Major Henry Smith, acting commissioner of the city police, indicates that the alibis of local butchers and slaughterers were investigated, with the result that they were eliminated from the inquiry. A report from Inspector Swanson to the Home Office confirms that 76 butchers and slaughterers were visited, and that the inquiry encompassed all their employees for the previous 6 months. Some contemporary figures, including Queen Victoria, thought the pattern of the murders indicated that the culprit was a butcher or cattle drover, on one of the cattle boats that plied between London and mainland Europe. Whitechapel was close to the London docks, and usually such boats docked on Thursday or Friday and departed on Saturday or Sunday. The cattle boats were examined, but the dates of the murders did not coincide with a single boat's movements, and the transfer of a crewman between boats was also ruled out. The concentration of the killings around weekends and public holidays, and within a short distance of each other, has indicated to many that the Ripper was in regular employment and lived locally. Others have thought that the killer was an educated upper-class man, possibly a doctor or an aristocrat who ventured into Whitechapel from a more well-to-do area. Such theories draw on cultural perceptions such as fear of the medical profession, mistrust of modern science, or the exploitation of the poor by the rich. Suspects proposed years after the murders include virtually anyone remotely connected to the case by contemporary documents, as well as many famous names who were never considered in the police investigation, including a member of the British royal family, an artist, and a physician. Everyone alive at the time is now long dead, and modern authors are free to accuse anyone, without any need for any supporting historical evidence. Suspects named in contemporary police documents include 3 in Sir Melville Macnaghten's 1894 memorandum, but the evidence against these individuals is at best circumstantial. There are many varied theories about the identity and profession of Jack the Ripper, but authorities are not agreed upon any of them, and the number of named suspects reaches over 100. Despite continued interest in the case, the Ripper's identity remains unknown. Thanks for watching. For more videos please click like and subscribe.